Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video we're going to be covering how to build teams in Honkai Star Rail for any situation and with any units regardless of who you have in your roster. When constructing your dream team in Star Rail, you're of course going to want to bring along 4 party members. But when you're choosing your party members, you want to pay attention to what they're capable of. Based on my experience, there's 4 different roles for the 4 different slots in your party. Let's cover them and talk a little bit about why they're important. The first role is that of a healer. Now, healers are pretty much essential in every team unless you seriously overgear the content or have a very special strategy like one around preventing damage with shields in pretty much everything you're doing. A way to recover is essential when you're doing long drawn out fights, especially with bosses with multiple ad phases and health bars. The next role to fulfill in your team is going to be that of a primary damage dealer or main carry. This unit's job is going to be to dish out the pain and take down the majority of the enemy's health bar by spamming their skill every single action they get. In Star Rail, skills deal substantially more damage, have bonus effects, and generate way more energy than basic attacks. So it makes sense to have your main damage dealer soaking up the majority of your team's skill points and dishing out as much damage as possible. The third role on our list here is going to be that of a hybrid carry. The reason we call it a hybrid is that many units can find their home here. Traditionally, you're most likely going to want to bring a secondary damage dealer who can really help support your primary. You can use the remainder of your skill points who aren't being used by your main damage dealer and healer to fuel this character's kit, so they're pretty much most of the time going to be using their skill. However, let's dive a little bit more into that. You could bring a damage dealer, but you could also bring a defensive unit who uses their skill frequently. Someone like March 7th is a really good pick here and is going to give you a really tanky team. In addition to that, you could also bring a support who really wants to bring their skill to the table. Someone like Bronya is also a great option for this. Furthermore, you could really capitalize on focusing on break bars and bring a unit with massive AoE and really good break bar scaling on all of their skills. When choosing which character to bring as your hybrid carry, make sure to choose a character who wants to use their skill frequently but doesn't have to always use it. And of course, make sure the character you're bringing is solving the problem that you're currently facing in the encounter you're challenging. The final role to fulfill on your team building is going to be that of a support or utility character. So far we've covered a main damage, a healer, and a off damage. And between those 3, we've pretty much accounted for all of the skill points we're going to start with and most of the skill points we're going to generate. So we don't have a whole lot of wiggle room left on our last character. We'll cover skill points and how to use them and allocate them effectively in combat in a second here, as it's one of the most important things to team building. But it's fair to say this last role won't have a lot of skill points to play with. So when considering characters for this last role, you're going to look for ones which have very powerful talents or ultimates to rely on. And they may have a situationally powerful skill which they can use very infrequently to turn the tides of battle or really make a huge impact. So a good character, which has got a great example of this, is a character like Asta. Asta's skill is very situational, and it's very powerful when used on a singular target who is weak to fire to break bars. But you wouldn't use it consistently throughout a simulated universe run or against a pack of monsters which have varying weaknesses. Asta, however, has a basic attack bonus that burns whenever she uses her basic attack, meaning her basic attack is actually stronger than other characters. In addition to that, her ultimate is also incredibly powerful for supporting the whole team and can absolutely turn the tides of battle. So Asta is a character that you would bring primarily for her ultimate, and you would just spam her basic attacks to generate skill points for the rest of your team and then turn the tides with her ultimate. And then another character who is great for this role is a character like Ting Yun. Ting Yun actually has a very powerful skill, but it's a skill that you use very infrequently. She can apply a blessing to a character in the party which lasts 3 turns, increasing their damage as well as giving them additional abilities. Now in addition to that, when characters like Ting Young bless another character, she also gains increased damage herself based off of your main carry that you blessed, main damage, meaning she's actually a really powerful character to spam auto attacks with. In addition to that, her ultimate is also a game changer and will allow you to deal substantially more damage or pull out a clutch heal. These 2 characters are perfect utility and support characters who don't consume too many skill points but bring a lot to the table. So we've talked a lot about roles as well as skill points, but how does that all play out in reality? Well, when you enter a battle like a battle in the Forgotten Hall, you're going to notice you start out with 3 skill points baseline. If you're using a healing set, you can get an extra point, or even 2 if you have 2 characters with that set. You can see here that my Natasha has that set, so I've started with 4. Now, if we take a quick look at my team here, you can see we have Yang Qing here as my main carry. Remember, your main carry always wants to use their skill to deal the big damage. For my secondary carry or off damage, I have Trailblazer here, who is primarily here to use up any spare skill points that I have generated and make sure I don't overcap on skill points. And they're also going to be doing a great job in this fight specifically to break bars in an AoE scenario. Next up we have our healer, who is situationally going to consume skill points to heal the team, if need be. And then finally we have our support, who doesn't really want to consume any skill points, but here is mainly just to use their ultimate. Now overall, if our main 2 damage dealers use their skill and our healer and support don't, we're going to be generating 2 skill points and spending 2 skill points. Basically, we're going to be going even, which is the ideal scenario. In an event that we need to use extra skill points, we do have a few skill points as a buffer to start the round. So if a turn we needed to use a double damage and a heal, we'd be consuming 3 and only generating 1, we'd be losing 2, but that's just fine because we start out with 4. So you can see that it's definitely very important to manage your skill points effectively, and that's why the roles are as they are. There's absolutely no way that you could support 3 separate units all spamming their skills. Someone wouldn't get to play on the same level as the others. So this is definitely the most optimal way to set things up from my experience. Let's play a quick turn and see how it plays out. So our main star is going to use their ability. We're going to go ahead and use our auto attack on Asta. And then we're going to go ahead and break some break bars with our Trailblazer. Natasha doesn't look like she needs to heal anyone, but Trailblazer has their ultimate, so we'll go ahead and use that. And we'll take out some break bars, I guess. And then we don't need any healing still, so auto attack it up. And you can see here that we still have our 4 skill points. And if we did need to heal someone, we absolutely could have. So our star of the show still gets to use their skill. He's got his ultimate up now, in fact. We got Asta here, we can go ahead and attack someone. And then we got our secondary damage dealer, of course. And then we can continue down our loop. So now here we can see someone actually does need a heal, our Trailblazer. Now if we didn't want to lose a skill point here, and we just wanted to go ahead and keep and maintain our 4 for, perhaps a longer fight, we could go ahead and rely on our healer's ultimate. And that's why healers with powerful healing ultimates are absolutely very strong. Because in place of using a skill point, you can actually just waste their ultimate. So here I'm going to use this basic attack to maintain my skill points and then just rely on the ultimate. Now I still have my skill points available where I need them, and we can go ahead and continue the fight. And of course we'll continue on our merry way, and we can go ahead and take out the enemy as we see fit. Alright, so we've mastered the roles and expertly understood the skill points. It's time to put that stuff into action and build some insane teams with the roster that we've got access to here. Alright, so it doesn't just stop at constructing a numerically powerful team. We need to make sure that we're building the right team for the right scenario. Now there's 2 things to consider when building teams. The first of which is going to be the resistances and vulnerabilities of the enemies you're coming up against. And the second of which is going to be your objective. In Simulated Universe, most of the time, your objective is simply to survive, with the secondary objective to defeat the enemy, because if you're surviving, they're most likely dying as well. In a Forgotten Hall run though, your objective is to beat the enemy as fast as possible, and that is going to dictate what kind of a team you construct. But in both scenarios, we're going to need to tackle vulnerabilities and defenses as well. So let's take a look at that first. So to do that, we're going to take a look at details of the monsters. So we can see here the boss of this part of the fight is Bronya, and she comes with a few adds. Now right away we can see that 3 out of 4 of the enemies are weak to physical, so someone on our team, or multiple if possible, should be physical based. In addition to that, we can also see that Bronya herself is weak to fire, and a couple of her adds are weak to ice. So those are the 3 types I'm going to be focusing on when building my team here. So we have Sushang, who is a great physical carry here. We're going to bring her as our main carry. In addition to that, we could also bring our Iceman up here. He could also be a main carry candidate, but I think overall we might actually swap to our Iceman here for our primary carry and do Sushang as our off carry here. And the reason for that is that the 5-star Ice guy, he absolutely needs to use his skill at every possible scenario. Now for our healer, we've got the physical weakness, so we're going to bring Natasha. And for our support, we're probably looking at bringing either Trailblazer Fire, who's a great defensive support, or Asta, who's a great offensive support. I think in this scenario, because the enemies are overleveling me so much, I'm going to bring the defensive option here. Now for the next team here, we have Svarog, who is vulnerable to lightning, wind, and fire, and both of his add types are vulnerable to lightning. So we're absolutely going to want to bring some lightning units if possible. For our main carry here, I think we're going to go with Dan Heng because he's got so much damage, and I don't really have any other vulnerable carries for Svarog here. And then I think for our secondary, we'll go for Serval, an AoE break lightning beast, absolutely a good choice here. And then finally for our healer, we're going to have to go with Bailu because she's my only one left, but fortunately she is lightning. And then for our support, we have 2 options. We can either go with Ting Yan, who is lightning as well, or we could go with Asta, who is fire. I think in this scenario, we're going to go with Asta to make sure that we get the offensive pressure that we need on Svarog, and also get a little bit more moves with her speed ultimate. In addition to that, she can also help out immensely with break bars when Svarog is by himself. So you can see here, I've built some teams which might not numerically be the best, but they're the best for the scenarios that we're in. And that's taking advantage of enemies' weaknesses. And we're using the rough rolls to build those teams effectively. The first 2 units in each of these teams are going to be spamming their skills, with the latter 2 using their skills situationally. Now it doesn't stop there though, we absolutely need to check out the resistances that enemies can have as well. It's essential to make sure that you capitalize on these as well, or you're going to have a really rough time. Now resistances are a little bit harder to find than vulnerabilities. Often you actually need to go into the details of the enemy to find them. But absolutely not taking advantage of resistances is going to hurt you in the long run. You can see here this enemy has fire res. Now what resistance does is essentially reduce that element's damage by so much that it feels like it does close to nothing. So bringing a fire unit to this fight against a boss with fire res is an absolute no-no. Now to capitalize on the discussion we had earlier with hybrid units, let's build some more defensive teams without some double damage setups here. So if we wanted a super defensive team for this fight here, we could go ahead and bring our main carry, who is Ice, who the enemy is weak to. We could bring a secondary hybrid carry of March, so she'll be able to provide shields for the whole team, and we'll be able to get really defensive. And then we could bring a physical healer. And then for our support, we could bring any of our supports, but if we want to go really tanky, we could bring Trailblazer Fire. And this team is going to overall be super duper tanky, and it's very unlikely you're going to be going down with this kind of a setup. To round things out, I wanted to talk a little bit about synergies. Now, while it's really important to take advantage of vulnerabilities and breaking break bars, and in some cases and for some bosses it's mandatory, you don't absolutely have to bring a unit which breaks the break bars. A good example of this is if your most powerful character is Yang Qing, he does double the damage of all your other guys, and the enemy isn't vulnerable to ice. As long as it's not resistant to ice, you absolutely could bring him and absolutely excel with him. Overall, this is going to be where synergies come in and shine. Certain units and certain compositions work way better together than others. So while you might be building a team full of units who are super effective against the enemies you're fighting, if they don't have any synergy together, you might not do as well as a team who is just neutral to the enemy and not taking advantage of break bars in the long run. Now, there are a few team compositions here that I want to highlight as some pretty interesting ones. So the first one to highlight here is one that everyone will have available to them, and that is the combination of Trailblazer Fire and March 7th. Trailblazer Fire applies shields to every party member every single time they attack. March 7th's passive allows her to attack with a counterattack twice per turn, as long as the enemy hits a shielded ally in that turn. Now this is a pretty powerful combination because every single turn the enemy has, March is basically going to attack twice. Now the catch is that March's ultimate is an incredibly strong crowd control tool, and her counterattack actually generates energy for herself. So with this team, you're going to end up generating a ton of energy for March, protecting your team between both of the characters' shields, and having a crazy crowd control ultimate up more than it normally would be. Another really good example with March is the example of Clara and March. They both have counterattacks and they both like to play defensive. So these two units have fantastic synergy with one another. The next thing to consider is characters which are incredibly powerful when buffed. So Dan Heng's talent actually requires him to be buffed to take effect. When Dan Heng receives a buff or a heal over time or any sort of benefit from his ally, he gains massive wind penetration for his next attack. So pairing him with any sort of support who gives him any buff is going to be absolutely paramount to maximizing his damage. The final example I have here is going to be that of Yang Qing. So Yang Qing has a passive called Empathic Blade. Empathic Blade is essentially a buff that he applies to himself every time he uses his skill. Now the catch is, if Yang Qing is hit, he will lose this buff, and the majority of his benefit and damage comes from maintaining that buff. Now the cool thing is, if he's shielded even though he's hit, he will not lose the buff. So Yang Qing is most synergistic with a team that can protect him with shields. So something like March, Trailblazer, or Jeopard is very good with Yang Qing as the main carry. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video and learned something new. Hopefully you guys are looking forward to more, as there'll be plenty on the way. And until next time, cheers.